Hi everyone. One of the things I believe is that no matter who you are, you have a story, and no matter who you are, whether rich or poor, or no matter what colour your skin, your background, your education level, none of that changes the fact that I believe, at least, that your story is powerful. And one of the main reasons I think your story is powerful is because, stories have this power to tell us who we are. They provide identity, and of course we're always changing and we're always growing and maturing, but part of that process is our stories shape who we are, and they shape who we are becoming. The power of stories is its ability to feed into our identity, to shape us, to form us. But it's not just our storytelling us who we are, it's the bigger stories around us as well. We have our own individual stories, but we also have collective stories, such as our families, our culture, government, our boss at work, marketing companies. There's this understanding of people all around us that our stories shape us, and our stories can shape other people. The stories we tell ourselves shape us. The stories we tell others shape others as well. And some of those other people, culture, government, your boss, parents, marketing companies, some of them can be helpful in shaping us and identifying us, others less so. I think that God has a story, and I think that God's story tells us who we are meant to be. And part of who it tells us we're meant to be might surprise you. Let me read to you from 1 Peter 2 verse 9. This is speaking about identity. And this is the Apostle Peter writing to a group of churches in Asia Minor about 2,000 years ago. And he says, "But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light." And there's quite a few kind of facets of identity there, and they're all encouraging, but I want to focus on the idea of being a priest. You know, it's not just for the men in robes. It's for them, yes, but it's being priestly is meant to be part of everyone's story. Being priestly, according to God's story, I think, is central to the story of humanity, the story of us. So, what does that mean? If this is true, if what I'm thinking is true, what does it mean for my everyday life? Well, let me read to you from the book of Numbers. So, we've read from the New Testament, now we're reading from the Hebrew Bible, Numbers 16, verses 46 to 50. Then Moses said to Aaron, "Take your censer and put incense in it, along with burning coals from the altar, and hurry to the assembly to make atonement for them. Wrath has come out from the Lord, the plague has started." So Aaron did as Moses said, and ran to the midst of the assembly. The plague had already started among the people, but Aaron offered the incense and made atonement for them. He stood between the living and the dead, and the plague stopped. But 14,700 people died from the plague, in addition to those who had died because of Korah. Then Aaron returned to Moses at the entrance to the tent of meeting, for the plague had stopped. And so, the idea of the story of humans, including the concept of being priestly, might seem like a good idea never to read the Bible again. Who wants to be priestly? But maybe we need to expand our imagination of what being priestly is. A priestly identity is actually a deeply relational identity. So much so that when lived out the way it was designed, a priestly identity can save lives. In the Hebrew Bible, public health requirements were carried out by the priests, ensuring that people were able to function safely and to flourish within society. They made it possible for people to meet with God and each other. And a priestly identity, basically, it makes safe spaces for two parties to connect with each other. And in this passage, which I've just read out, the first high priest of Israel, Aaron's actions, they prevented people from being consumed by a plague. I mean, yes, lots of people did die, but so many more would have, unless Aaron had chosen to stand between the living and the dead. And during a health crisis, that's what Aaron did. He stood between the living and the dead to save lives. Now, the context of the plague that afflicted the Israelites in the wilderness, in Numbers 16, was a situation of jealousy by the Israelites. There was a reference to the Korahites and the family of Korah. And these guys, they basically rebelled against God's chosen leaders. They looked at Moses' position of power and they wanted it for themselves. And they formed a rebellion to challenge him. If you read before that passage in Numbers 16, they said, these rebellious Israelites, they said that there was nothing special about Moses. They said, why has he got this privilege of being able to meet with God in the tent of meeting? And they claimed that they had as much right to be priests of God as Moses and Aaron did. And I actually think that they're right. While they were right about having a priestly identity, the problem lay with their desire to pull Moses down instead of getting about their priestly duties. If it was true, if their claim was true that they had just as much right to have to be priests, then they could have done that. They could have done what humans are meant to do in their priestly identity. They could have brought people together. They could have spoken blessing. They could have represented two parties, one to each other. The irony is that yes, by virtue of being human, they were already priests. Our priesthood, so to speak, our priestly identity is not about us and how much power and influence we can wield. That was the major error of the people who rebelled and caused the plague in the first place. They thought that being priestly is about power and influence, but it's not about that. In our humans, as the story of us as humans having a priestly identity as told by the story of God, the Bible, is not about us primarily and how much power and influence and ego we can wield, but rather it's about bringing two groups of people together for people to flourish. Once again, our priestly identity is deeply relational, and we mediate relationship. It's interesting that Aaron offers incense on behalf of the people at risk of death because of the plague caused by the rebellion. Incense in the Bible is often used as a symbol of prayer. And often when we discover a deeper relationship with Jesus, all we want to do sometimes is just leave behind the darkness of our past and surround ourselves with everything that represents life. We want to leave these places of negative influence. We want to leave these places of death, so to speak. And we just want to spend time, in church, reading our Bible, praying to Jesus. And that's, there's some wisdom in that, actually. But we read from the life of Aaron that maybe the best place for someone living out their priestly identity is to stand between the living and the dead, to connect them, to connect these two spaces together, so that life can reign and death can cease. A lamp isn't meant to be put under a bushel. Jesus teaches this in his Sermon on the Mount. It needs to be placed where it can shine into the darkness. In standing between the living and the dead, if we choose to live out our priestly identity, we need a relationship with both aspects of our past and aspects of our present and our future, and intimacy with both parties, so that we can truly represent God to our neighbours and offer our neighbours up to God in prayer. Just like Aaron went to the coalface of where the plague was wreaking havoc, and he stood between the living and the dead, and he offered up incense. Anyway, these are my thoughts, but I'm encouraged by them, and I hope you are too, but I'm also interested in your thoughts. Basically, I think as human beings, we have a priestly identity, and that we are called to go to places where there is darkness and brokenness and even death, to stand between the living and the dead and to bring life. Our priestly identity is deeply relational, and it's meant to bring deep relational flourishing. Anyway, I've got some questions for you. Hopefully this provokes some discussion. I'll be interested in some of your answers. So, first set of questions is, when you hear the word priest, what image or roles come to mind? How does the idea of everyone having a priestly identity challenge or affirm those images? What might it mean in practical terms to stand between the living and the dead today in 21st century Melbourne? Can you think of situations where someone has acted as a bridge or a mediator in your life, and what difference did that make? And finally, In what ways can being priestly in your community look like creating safe spaces for people to connect with each other and with God? What might that look like today, this week in Melbourne? What might change in your life if you begin to see yourself as having a priestly identity, a person who is called to help others connect with God and with each other? I hope that gets the old gears in the brain ticking over, and you have some thoughts about that, provoke some discussion to encourage us, and I'd love to hear some of your feedback. All right, thanks guys.